Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this edition of the program, The Platform. On this program, we examine the national issues of the Bahamas and sometimes we talk about international issues as well. There is something happening in the Bahamas this November and many people should be aware of it. And today on our program, we are going to talk about a Bahamian, someone who was born in 1839. October 2nd, 1839. He lived for a while in the Bahamas, the United States. He was a priest, he was a physician, an historian, a teacher, a medical missionary, a Freemason, an author, a publisher, newspaper editor. Who are we talking about? Well, Dr. Joseph Robert Love is who we are talking about. And on the 21st of November is the 100th anniversary of his death in Kingston, Jamaica. And as I said, he was born in the Bahamas, right in Grantstown. And so he lived an incredible life and had a great impact on the United States of America, on the Republic of Haiti, and Jamaica. Our guest on the program to talk about Robert Love today is Mr. Phillip Smith, who is a former member of Parliament, and he is a former junior minister in our country. He represented the North End, Long Island, Rum Key, and San Salvador for many years, and he is well known in political circles in the Bahamas. Today, he's talking about Robert Love, however. Mr. Smith, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me, sir.
It's always a pleasure to have you on our program, and you're doing some great things. As a matter of fact, you are a member of the National Reparations Committee?
Yes, sir. I have the honor to serve as co-chair of the committee.
And so tell us what the committee is doing with respect to Reverend Dr. Joseph Robert Love.
Well, our mission as a committee is to engage the Bahamian community in a conversation about all matters relative to that horrific stage in our life when slavery was law in our country and the period following into today. And part of that process is to recall various times, various elements, various circumstances, various activities that would have impacted the country then and us now. And in the process of doing this, a name kept popping up about those people who we would consider great, Joseph Robert Love. And Jamaicans know him extremely well. He was, as a matter of fact, in their short list for consideration for national heroes when they went independent, because they recognized that in the late 19th century, the impact he had on causing people of color in Jamaica to focus on their past, focus on their role in Jamaica then, and to look at what their possibilities were. And he wrote prolifically. He spoke at churches, community halls, wherever a crowd would permit him to address them. I've heard no recordings of anything he would have said. I've read some of what he has said. What I read about him, though, was that he was a mesmerizing speaker. And he was someone who was read by all levels of Jamaican society. People would gather who could not themselves read, so that a designated reader would read to them over and over again articles that Dr. Love would have published about what was obtaining in the world at the time and the role that Jamaicans had in that. And which is an extraordinary thing, that his written word, spoken by somebody else when they read it to others, was so powerful when most people who attempt to communicate use their own inflection, their own quality of voice to put voice to the words they would want to communicate, the ideas that they would want to share. When Love himself was present, I'm told that historians suggest that you could hear the proverbial pin drop in between his pauses, because he was that kind of person. At the same time, he was a community working priest who went out to provide, as he is instructed in his training as a priest, to provide comfort to the sick, to the needy. He was a politician who caused people, though he was an immigrant, to want to vote for him, and in fact became a member of the colonial parliament in Jamaica. There was a young man in Jamaica as well during the late 19th century, early 20th century, who read what Robert Love wrote, who internalized what Robert Love taught, and who himself went on in the early 20th century to, like Love, mesmerize crowds of people. This person, the great Marcus Mosiah Garvey, was mentored, in fact, by this Bahamian who immigrated to the United States, then to Haiti, then to Jamaica. And what it says as well is that, as in the United States, where they accepted him, where he went to seminary to become an Anglican priest, where he became the first black graduate from the University of Buffalo, in his efforts and studies to become a medical doctor. Went to Haiti as a missionary, and while in Haiti for 10 years, became a confidant of General Manigault, whose descendant was for a short time in our lifetimes a president of Haiti. The General Manigault, Dr. Love's friend, didn't achieve that distinction, though he tried. Which some believe is why Dr. Love left Haiti at the invitation of the government to move to Jamaica in 1891. And while in Jamaica, like I said earlier, he saw and then spoke to what he saw. He also wanted black people in Jamaica to appreciate that they had the potential which came as a result of their no longer being in legal bondage as slave holdings to any individuals. But it was a potential that they individually had to strive to achieve. So, for instance, contrary to what was the general view at the time, he taught that it was critically important that not only would young men be educated, but that young women were educated, suggesting that a society with an uneducated female population was doomed to failure. And so I've described him as a Renaissance man because of the breadth of his involvement, because of the excellence in each of those activities. And what he says for us who are involved in the reparations movement is that no obstacle is unsurmountable, that a fight for justice is a fight worth doing no matter what barriers are placed before one. I'd also like to mention that Dr. Love was not the only person born in the Bahamas who achieved greatness on the world stage and in other countries. He is but one.
Yes.
And what we need to do is to not only focus on those who contribute today, but to reflect on all of those who went before, because each of them was part of that process of teaching us to be what we are now.
I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of people who are listening to us have never heard of Robert Love. And the question is, why? Here is a man who was born in Grantstown. He didn't serve in the Parliament of the Bahamas, but served in the Parliament of Jamaica. Why did we not know of all of this? Why have we not done a better job, you think, in exposing the name Dr. Robert Love?
But I think you have to remember that Robert Love, born just after the so-called emancipation process. You'll recall the British recognized that they needed to help the rich white people in Britain, so they made a deal with them to purchase their chattel property in the Caribbean in order to provide them with money so that they could invest that money to make themselves and Britain richer. And then they did an assessment of the value of this chattel property and came to the conclusion that at the time, the combined value of Africans who were held in slavery in the Caribbean, the English Caribbean, our ancestors, was about 46 million pounds. The government of Britain couldn't come up with all that money at the time, so they made a deal with these folks to say, look, we'll give you 20 million pounds of real money, cash, so that you could invest it in your businesses in England. And you could work those people who used to be your property for a period of between 3 and 6 years under an apprenticeship scheme where you would pay them no wages and where they will learn to enter into human conditions and they'd work for this period, no pay. And that they put a value of about $26 million. So they very nicely made a deal with the former slave owners that the former slaves would purchase 54% of themselves by their labor. And then you recall that during that process, very few people who were held in slavery, who were held in this legal bondage, were permitted the privilege to learn how to read and write, because the person who could read and write could come to understand that there was more than the hovel in which he was required to live.
Yeah, but Robert Love was an exception.
Now, Robert Love, born in 1839 in Grantstown, would have been born to people who, if not themselves, having recently been chattel property, would have lived with people, among people, next to people, in friendship with people who were chattel property. If you show a photograph or a drawing of Robert Love, you'd recognize that he was not a light-skinned person.
Right.
He was African in real terms. And so he would have heard these stories. Now, he was the beneficiary of the thirst for knowledge that former slaves had, that some former slaves had, and he was the beneficiary of the largesse of Anglican priests at the time who, working in St. Agnes, offered their skills to teach some people, those I suppose who would show up, how to read and write. So he, yes, in the early 1840s, learned to read and write. He developed a thirst for that and continued it. And I suppose because of the influence of the priests in St. Agnes who would have helped teach him these things, developed a thirst to follow in their footsteps, wanting to become a priest. Whatever the circumstances were within the local church then, as a young man in his 20s, he felt discouraged in becoming a priest in the local diocese. So he left to go to the United States, and left to go to the United States not too long after the end of their Civil War, a time when the talk coming out of the United States was about Reconstruction, when the victorious army of the Union, the North, had published suggestions that people who had been enslaved in the South were to be provided with some property, were to be provided with some animals, were to be provided with some skills. You know, the 40 acres and a mule concept. The same things that people who used to be enslaved in the Bahamas and in the English Caribbean had been promised by the English for emancipation. That not only are we going to set you free, we're going to provide you with the materials you would need to be able to make a life. We're going to teach you skills, we're going to provide you land, we're going to provide you this. It didn't happen here. So 20 years afterwards, when he left to go to the United States, 30 years afterwards, he went at a time when Reconstruction in the United States was still talked about as if it was real. Now, you're a man who is well read. You appreciate that it was in a very short period of time that former slaves in the United States came to appreciate that that was illusion. That was just a setup so that con artists could acquire lots of property and structurally re-enslave people that had been freed in the Emancipation Proclamation of the United States, just like the colonial structure in the Bahamas and the rest of the Caribbean had structurally re-enslaved the uneducated masses who were former slaves, who had no ability to read and write, and that obtained for many decades following the so-called emancipation. And it was really people like Joseph Robert Love who emancipated himself, like the great Bob Marley said one has to do. One has to emancipate oneself. He did that. And when he went into the United States, taking advantage of opportunity to enter a seminary, being ordained, and then while in Buffalo, where he was working as a priest, made application at the University of Buffalo. Now, they probably thought it was, kind of strange, but I suppose in the spirit of Reconstruction, they accepted his application, and now they're very proud to brag that, just over 130 years ago, this great man graduated from the University of Buffalo. But they weren't sad to see him leave from the Buffalo area, I hear, because while he was there, he talked about us, and the us were a black people. And what we have by way of right, based on our contributions. He talked to people who had been enslaved in the United States to say that the economy of the United States, which had been agricultural for a great period of time, was built by free slave labor, and that their descendants had an invested right to the benefit of their ancestors' labor. He taught the same thing in Haiti. He taught the same thing in Jamaica. Following on him, you've heard of names like C.R. Walker. You've heard of Toots. You've heard of Gillette. You've heard of many names who followed. But some were immigrants to the Bahamas. Some were born in our islands.
I was going to ask you about Stephen Dillett, who came out of Haiti and became a member of the Parliament of the Bahamas, the first black to be a member of the Parliament of the Bahamas, I think.
Yes.
Why did Robert Love not come back and make a contribution to the political development of the Bahamas, rather than going to Haiti and Jamaica? Here's a man born in Ranstown, went to New York, became a priest, and many other things. But he did not make the kind of political contribution to the Bahamas as, say, a Stephen Dillett.
Because as I understand it, the history, and it's, you hear different stories. I don't know which of them are true, except that there are enough of them to suggest that he was made to feel that we don't want you when he was in his 20s. And that's why he left. And having been, as it were, kicked out of the house, thrown out of the family, he went looking for family elsewhere. It is in Jamaica where he was completely accepted. Just like we accepted Stephen Dillett, until in recent times we're now trying to suggest that the Dilletts were not from Haiti,
Yeah.
that they were French.
Yeah. This is a case of a prophet having no honor in his own country.
That's well put. Yes.
Yeah, it is interesting. But let's take a break here on our program. We are talking about Dr. Robert Love on our program today, and you would enjoy the rest of this program, I'm sure, because Mr. Phillip Smith, our guest, has a deep knowledge of the life and times of Robert Love. You were also chairman of our Quincentennial Commission one time, was it?
Yes, sir.
Yes, and we have to talk a little bit about that too. Let's take this break on our program, and we'll come right back.